So welcome everybody to the second session of the afternoon. I hope you had time to grab a coffee or some lunch. Yeah, it's going to follow the same format as the previous session. So we'll have three presentations. Each will last about 20 minutes. And then at the conclusion of that, we'll have a shared question and answer period. I guess I'll introduce myself first. So my name is Adam Safer. I am a postdoc at UQAM, as well as the director of the Quebec hub of PhiLab. Our three presenters today are April Lindgren, who's a professor at Ryerson, and her talk is titled Philanthropic Support for Canadian Journalism. These titles might have changed since I had them written down, so keep that in mind. Our second presenter is Manuel Litalien. He's a prof at Nipissing University, and he's going to be talking about the philanthropic ecosystem in northern communities. And our final presenter is Francois Brouard. He's a professor at Carleton, and I'm being told he's going to speak about both sports organizations and arts organizations in the post-COVID era. Okay, so yeah, I will hand it over to Manuel, who will be talking about the philanthropic ecosystem in northern communities.
So, welcome to Exploring the Philanthropic Ecosystem in Northern Communities. I'm here today to present a project rather than actually the results. So this is at the very early phases of the project, contrary to April, who's been actually quite advanced, more advanced than we are in the process of her research. Funded by PhiLab, and I think April have more funding as well. You could correct me later on, April. So, well, this is very strange. I can't move forward in my slides. Perhaps this is why. So the team research is composed of myself, Dr. Natalia Brown, Francois Brouard, and Grace Adam, which is a PhD candidate at Carleton University, and Dr. Brouard as well from Carleton University. So the project, if you could see a little bit, is still very much a work in progress because of the timeline that we're at. And so we're at the fourth. This was accepted 4 or 5 months ago in January. And so we got the approval there to move ahead. And so we're in the first phase of the project. So we're at the very early phase and ongoing. So here's a bit of the background rationale behind the project. The idea is that I had a talk with Dr. Ryan Gibson, who focuses on rural philanthropy. We had a talk in 2019 in Vancouver. Our discussion essentially on regional philanthropy as a vehicle for regional development got me thinking quite a bit about what kind of topic I could engage further So Dr. Gibson focused a lot on this link between sustainability of rural communities and rural development strategies. And so in turn, this leads me to the idea, the emerging of the idea of looking at the distinction between rural and northern nonprofit sector, and how to sustain partnership between grant-making foundations and northern communities in Canada. The idea matured further after that with Dr. Fontan, as we talked about possible project, and Dr. Susan Phillips on the effect of COVID-19 on the sector as well. So it led to a small grant, which we obtained with Dr. Brown on the impact of COVID-19 on the nonprofit sector in North Bay and the surrounding, which is still ongoing. And then we had subsequent meeting with Dr. Brouard, which is the Ontario Hub coordinator, as you know now, and Dr. Brown. We consolidated the project as we're brainstorming about the difficulty northern communities are facing. So the effect of environment and geographical location on the presence and activities of foundation in northern communities. So some of the reflection we had was, for example, North Bay has but 2 foundations. So they are North Bay and Area Community Foundations and the North Bay Regional Health Center Foundation. So we have lots of organizations like a charitable organization here in North Bay. We also had the present very briefly of the McConnell Foundation, and occasionally we have the Ontario Trillium Grant Foundation present here. But the reflection was based around the idea that these are punctual. The McConnell and the Trillium Grant was a punctual project happening here, not a long-term commitment to the community. And so some of the reflection went, well, we're situated, could be just geographical. Why do we have such a little amount of foundation in North Bay? Maybe it's just because we're too far away from Pearson Airport. We're actually only 337 kilometers from Pearson Airport. And that's a huge contrast with Sudbury, which actually is 380 kilometers from Pearson Airport, and they have 9 foundations. And so we were going, okay, so should population dictate the number of foundations found? This rapidly raises a lot of ethical questions, as the 2 cities, for example, have very different healthcare needs, healthcare expertise, whereby they have different community challenges. So, well, North Bay could equally benefit from a stronger presence of foundation on its territory. So you can see how this project really took off really rapidly as we were brainstorming about these ideas. So long-term commitment, we were asking ourselves to project in the North existed in perhaps, what if they were existing in a very specific model of funding was in place when foundation were engaging in Northern community. And so if that's the case, were such models studied in their success to sustainability and to self-sufficiency, or rather perhaps focus was more on the completion of the project itself. So what kind of priority were given to funded projects? So again, lots of discussion brewed. How was the application process for granting grants application process and during COVID, in contrast to pre-COVID era? So did the foundation witness a higher demand, for example, to finance Northern communities? How did the pandemic provided new opportunities to engage with remote communities in the North virtually? But as we could see with the challenge with the presentation with April, that's proven to be quite a challenge, just to have access to proper internet connections. And so living in a city whose name has the word North Bay, and who prides itself in a slogan, North Bay, just north enough to be perfect. The first question that comes to mind as we were talking is perfect for what? Perfect for whom? Just enough for people from Toronto to feel in the far north, and far here is in brackets, or just enough for Torontonians to feel the adventures of the North. So this, we thought, would be a great opportunity for us to focus on the reason behind the timid presence of foundations, or the unique challenges presented to foundation when they're operating in the North. So we looked at, to start, the objective for the project, even at its infancy, we're looking to contrast Quebec and Ontario eventually to northern areas, further northern areas in other parts of Canada, and potentially other countries as well, and territories, right? We can think of Sweden, Finland, Greenland. So we're currently, the first phase, we're engaging with the literature, and we're expecting to find overlaps, the challenge presenting to foundation operating in the rural areas and in northern areas. So we assume that there will be a distinction between both. For example, the difference between towns such as Moose Factory and Hearst in Ontario are not confronted with the same logistic to access food, lodging, and infrastructure. So the challenges and pressures are here listed, but for further reason for this project is that northern communities have unique needs. Particularly the risk, they are at risk, the northern communities, a detrimental effect of climate change. And they are beset with aging transportation infrastructures, population decline, underpopulation, or depopulation. and also tend to lie on the disadvantaged side of the digital divide, which you've experienced firsthand today, with less access to high-speed internet, right? And so the digital divide is a serious issue. According to the OECD, Canada gets a D grade, surprise, for internet connectivity for fixed broadband and wireless broadband. In comparison with other countries, industrialized countries, we don't do too good. In 2019, just briefly, only 46.5% of the population in rural areas have broadband availability. The alternative is cellular network. And I have very delicious anecdote that I can tell you about my students having a hard time accessing material as they're engaging with their university courses online because they're further away. So it's a cellular network as an alternative is extremely expensive. And this begs the questions. We have about 1 in 5 Canadians who live in rural areas. So how does this challenge will be addressed? That's a huge question, interrogation mark, because if we're relying on the private sphere, we can think of surprise Starlinks, right? Elon Musk. This is $649 Canadian for the hardware purchase, and it's about $129 monthly for that service. So not quite sure that this is the way forward. So the landscape as the challenge and pressures identified our geographical distance and low population density, population declining membership in traditional service organizations, small size and number of charities to receive philanthropic dollars. That's also an issue. Some of the research questions that we came up with as we were brainstorming on the question and applying as well for the first phase funding to PhiLab revolve around what is defining the philanthropic ecosystem in northern communities. Is there a representation of different types of philanthropic ecosystem and subsystem in the north? What structural barriers exist, if any, that affect the way philanthropy is conducted in the north? What is the significance of the role played by community foundation in northern communities? Any notable difference between private foundation and public foundations operating in the north? So again, we're at the stage now, we're doing a literature review, and we're proposing to contrast eventually the Abitibi-Témiscamingue region in Quebec and Sault-Ste-Marie, Algoma in Ontario. They were chosen essentially because of their proximity and geographical similarities. So the relevance here that we have, I think someone's mic is still open, by the way. I'm hearing some feedback in the background, so I don't know if so we could do that, address that issue. So the relevance of the project is here listed, correcting an apparent absence of research on philanthropy in northern communities in Canada. The distinction between rural and northern community, that's quite a bit of a challenge here. And so we have also the idea that the commitment to northern communities to, ooh, what's going on here? Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you.
Okay, I just got a huge echo in my...
We heard that too.
Oh, okay, sorry, apologies about that. And so one of the first phase here is the literature review, and we've done, again, just before I'm going into the slides, I just want to underline that the Sustainable Development Goals is deeply connected with and getting involved further in northern communities. The motto, right, is leave no one behind from the Sustainable Development Goals. So obviously, we shouldn't forget the remote northern communities. And so some of the keywords that we've looked at is northern, remote, rural communities, philanthropy, charity, benevolence. Like we've listed a lot of different keywords. We've looked at public documents, annual reports, Canada Revenue Agency, we've looked at Statistics Canada. So there's quite a bit here. We've looked at speeches, database. We've covered all the database available from to Carleton University and to Nipissing University of course, Google Scholar is an easy one, but EBSCO, open dissertation, sociological abstract. So we've done our due diligence. It's still an ongoing process at this point. The second phase is where we'll be establishing how funding is channeled in northern communities. Well, again, we'll compare further Quebec and Ontario's different initiatives and modes of deliveries. We'll identify different factors regarding Northern Canadian communities, evaluate the success of foundation business and model in the North, assess the impact of COVID on the philanthropic ecosystem, and then disseminating, of course, the finding, which will be academic audience, summary reports, PhiLab publication, will publish in peer-reviewed journal as well. And so the next slide is interesting for us because as we're moving further into grasping the whole challenges to conduct such a research, which, by the way, we do have as a partner Community Foundations of Canada, and we also have a meeting planned next week with Mission Inclusion, which is formerly known as Les Œuvres du Cardinal Léger, I believe. And so we're still open to find new partners to conduct this research. But the challenges are, like you would expect, numerous. The challenges are just how we define things. So Revenue Canada and Statistic Canada and Local Health Integration Network don't necessarily place the North in the same spot. And so Canadians have many definitions of the North. A simple one is anything north of the 60th parallel. We could think of that. We also think of the North as Canada's Arctic from Ellesmere Island. And so you can see here the South, North Bay is right here. So as much as North Bay likes to think of itself as the North, indicates that according to Statistic Canada, it's in the South. So then there's a transition zone here in the middle, and then we're a northern transition zone, and then we're in the north. That's according to Statistic Canada. But it's interesting to look at, for Montrealers, Val-d'Or and Rouyn-Noranda are considered north, despite being just a few hours drive, so from Montreal. So many considered Chibougamau to being north, right? It's the 50th north. It's about the same latitude as, surprise, Kelowna in British Columbia. So how do we define the north or remote gets tricky, and I'll continue a bit on that route. So Statistic Canada's geographer thought about where the north could be just where the south ends and where the north begins. So their definition of nordicity actually have 16 different characteristics. And so there's southern limits of the boreal forest, for example, the presence of discontinuous permafrost, requirements from home, heating, community isolation, cost of living has been there, looking at Revenue Canada's formula for tax benefit based on remoteness. And that, again, opens another Pandora box, I think you say in English. It's the distance. Well, how do you define remoteness? Well, remoteness is a distance for a community that is determined by the distance to all the population centers. So geographical distance separating a spatial unit such as by some census, from nodes of activity, centers. So it gets more and more, how can I say, interesting as we're continuing trying to stop ourselves on one very specific definition of the North. Northern region covers almost 90%. If you look at Ontario, it's 90% of the province landmass that is considered to be a northern region. If we're looking at the definition here by the Local Health Integration Network. But the North in Ontario includes 144 municipalities, 10 territorial districts, 106 First Nation, and over 150 unincorporated communities. It includes about 46 local services boards. So again, quite a challenge for us here to try to see how we're going to define what will we adopt as the definition of the north of Ontario and northern Quebec. The north is also the home for a wide variety of languages and First Nation. You know, just because I come from Montreal, approximately 16% of Northern Ontario's population identifies French as their first language. It's so compared to we're 4.1% of the population overall in Ontario. So, and 37% of Northern Ontario lives in what is defined as rural area. So area that has less than 1,000 people. So again, a lot here to unpack. So as you can see in the slide, and I'm going to go further here, we can see that Hearst, which residents in North Bay think of Timmins and Hearst as being far north. However, Fort Severn here seems to be the far north. If you look at the map, Attawapiskat, which hit the news quite a lot, is even further up. But what's intriguing here is the fact that Ottawa and North Bay are almost on the same line and the Greater Sudbury, but they are, according to this map, belonging to the north. So what we would call the north east of Ontario and the northwest of Ontario, where Thunder Bay is located.
Manuel, sorry to interrupt, but if you could just wrap up in the next minute or so, that would be great.
Sure, I can definitely do that. Yeah, just to further create an echo for the Quebecers who are with us, if you look at Timmins in contrast with Quebec, it is on par with the city of Saguenay. Hearst is lower than Sept-Îles in Quebec. And Fermont in northern Quebec, Fermont, it's close to Labrador, right? It's in par almost with Attawapiskat, which is located right here. And so I will now jump into the conclusion. So the projecting, there we go. Conclusion is, to our knowledge, there's no mapping that exists regarding the philanthropic ecosystem in the Canadian northern communities. Therefore, it's the first step to acknowledge the work that is present in the north, success stories, mistakes, and how to move forward in sustainability and long-term commitment. So one initiative we could encourage is the possibility of making a grant-making foundation database on current, because I'm aware that there have been initiatives happening in the north by a couple of foundations, but it's very hard to get to those data. So if we can get that database, create a database of that sort, we can have research and philanthropic organization access the data and build on it for giving a proper picture of what's happening and how to build further. It's our understanding that Canada will inherit $780 billion in the next decade. So the country has a dense support of infrastructure for philanthropy, from tradition to digital. So little is known, however, about the plan to address the needs of Canadian northern communities and how this will be developed or prioritized in decades to come. Could we see a tension between philanthropic project and government initiatives in the north as both actors seeks to further build its social capital? That's one question. Another one, and a variation on that similar topic, is the question is not so much on the tension, but rather, is it possible to witness further collaboration in shared responsibilities in the north by both government and philanthropic actors to expand service to both communities? So the project seeks to encourage the beginning of a conversation in the ecosystem between strategic actors in both sides of the spectrum, the state and the nonprofit sector. And again, I'll finish with saying that the project is in line with the SDG, and they are a key entry point to advocate. Now, thank you very much for your time. I'm just encourage you to share any thoughts during the Q&A session. I'm going to stop sharing my presentation. Here we go.
Thank you, Manuel. Okay, we're going to go very quickly to Francois. I am going to keep very tight to a 20-minute session, just so we have a little bit of time for some Q&A.
Okay, so thank you. We'll look at the I'll say the post-COVID area, looking at the foundation, but I'll say some others that look around, and I will use two cases to illustrate some of the items. So the sports and the art sectors. Okay, so I'll say when we go back, I'll say that's as Kathy mentioned before, we're 14 months, I'll say, since the COVID. So there's a historical severity of the I'll say with the number of cases, the death. We are looking for the end, which is forthcoming, for I'll say months and months and months. So it's still forthcoming. I'll say it's really looked like a paper from a journal. So it's forthcoming, but sometimes it takes, I'll say, a year before I'll say it's accepted and it's published somewhere. So I'll say in terms of the I'll say the context. So we'll not look at all of them, but I'll say for I'll say the two cases, physical distancing and the close of public space, both the internal and the external, were basically, I'll say, probably the most important one that has and still have in fact a big effect on the availability. Okay, so when we look at also the crisis, we could look at also different ways to look at it. So usually there's the reaction and the recovery. I think Kathy or Adam referred before also to prepare for the next one, because there will also be a next one. So in the two cases, I will try to also look at the more immediate reaction and more more midterm and long-term recovery to see the differences. So there's a bunch of uncertainties both for individuals, organization, and society. We had example with the I'll say the need, let's say more the physical need. We had all the I'll say toilet paper episode at the beginning of the and then there was the I'll say the floor to make breads. So there was a bunch of say coming back to the more basic needs for individuals. For organization, there was a lot of I'll say cash, the workforce, all the risk, all the technology that goes with it, supply chain. For example, with the I'll say you need masks to operate. So to get those masks, but basically you are in competition with hospital or other type of organization. And obviously, I'll say there's a lot of uncertainties with society in general on the duration, on the subsequent waves, control of it. Okay. Now with the vaccine, it seems to be much better, but yeah. Okay. So I'll say when we'll look at it, there's changes, but there's changes, I'll say, that is resulting from the crisis, but there's also changes that was, I'll say, present before the crisis. So we can think, for example, of the I'll say constant and perpetual change that are appearing, all the demographic impact about the population, the environment and climate, which basically may be in fact the next crisis or the present parallel crisis, the existence and use of technology. But I will say it was there, it's still there. But when we think about it, not a long time ago, doing a presentation by video conference was not even, I'll say we could not do it. Okay, that's not possible. And since I'll say last year, it's possible. And in some, I'll say there's a lot of pros. There's some cons, but there's a lot of pros when we look at it. All the transport, okay, when you go on the roads, now the transportation is not a big issue. Okay, that's something which seemed to disappear. I'll say I presume it will come back, but it's less a problem than before. Work at the office compared to work at home, and all the information with data and privacy. and the use of big data. So obviously, I'll say with the change that we'll need, or I'll say transformation, maybe I'll say there's the crisis that was announced, but there will be other one. I'll say I mentioned the climate. There's also essential role. So I'll say before the crisis, there was a lot of, okay, if you're a public servant, basically you're kind of useless. Okay, you're just expenses. And the market is the solution to almost everything. Now, we don't hear a lot about the unusable public servant. They are they are really, really useful group of person. I'll say the way they move quickly, basically, to bring a lot of cash with some issues, but at the same time, you have the speed. It goes, I will say, in the sometimes I'll say it's less perfect. The role of citizen, I'll say there's the individual interest, but there's also a lot of collective interest that is part of it, and the essential role of the civil society. If we go back, I'll say with the comment in the presentation of April, I think all the news is, I'll say, something where you look at all the news, just look at the graph and the information on the pandemic and the number of deaths and all of this. I'll say that's an essential role for part of civil society. So basically what I want to present before looking at the two cases is, I'll say, kind of a framework to look at the different perspective, to look at stakeholders, and to look at action. So you look at the different perspective. When we look at the stakeholders, we could look at the donors, the advisors, the charities, and the society. And for the action, you could look at the private action, the organizational action, and also the governmental action. So I'll say that could serve as a template to look at the different impact, because usually I'll say when we look at foundation, I'll say we look just at, let's say, the charities, or we look at the one basically who received the money. But there's also I'll say the other one that are present, and there's probably more stakeholders than basically those four. I'll say not probably, there's more. Okay. So when we look at the perspective, so when we look at the human, social, and cultural one, so the family situation, all the emotion that is there, the solitude that is, I'll say, present, all the social problem that basically are as more concern, the culture is in motion with the information, the fake news, all the art and entertainment that was present, that was considered sometimes not that interesting or essential, and then in the crisis it become essential. When we look at the I'll say the financial, economic, and technological perspective, I'll say all the financial position, so the personal on the personal side, but also the organizational side. So there's people, in fact, who are better off now than before. And there's other group who basically are really worse. We just think of the I'll say the discussion about the in Ontario about the paid leave. Okay, so that's an example. So the economic situation, the work at different place. You have a job, you don't have a job anymore. If you work, for example, in restaurant, or if you work, let's say, in concert hall, you didn't work for a while. All the recession and the type of recession and the technology. Now, I'll say 4 years ago, if you say, I will Zoom you, no one will know about it. But now everyone know what Zoom is. And did it both for professional activities and for personal activities. We also have, I'll say, all the ecological, demographics, political, and law regulation perspective. So basically, I'll say those are, if we just think of the intervention by the public sector, the numerous tax and support measure that was put in place, okay, there's a lot of things that were added, okay, in what is available basically to different individuals and organizations. So when we look at stakeholders, so the donors, both the individuals and family, the organization, the foundation, they have, I'll say, they still have to keep track of their donors, okay, who they are, what they want to do, what they want to accelerate, like Adam mentioned. Sometimes like someone may give the money before they were due to give it because there's a need right now, not in 4 months. Financial position with the loss of jobs and revenues that Cathy mentioned before. I'll say the assets, sometimes the asset in cash, but sometimes I'll say assets, I'll say other than cash. All the trust that is present or should be present. When you look at the advisors and charities, there's the financial position with the fixed and variable costs. So at some point, if you have an organization, I'll say there's some fixed costs, even if you're not in the office. I'll say there's still electricity in that office to be paid. The deficit that are present or the excess of revenue and expenses, but usually it's more the deficit part which is present. The normal operation, the quick turnover to also manage in a crisis. Sometimes it's for a short period, but also in accounting, we say that a year is a short term. So now we're, I'll say, above the short term. All the relationship that need to be built between, I'll say, by the charities and the use of funds. I'll say maybe less, they are less picky on some of the, I'll say, the programs and the have to add some flexibility to those programs. Okay, on a society level, obviously the public health, all the emotion, fears, and the citizen reaction. We just need to look at the news and we see a bunch of those ones. There's constraint on the health system. So there's some capacity, okay, and we're close to that capacity. Now we are closing, basically, I'll say some hospitals, some operation, because I'll say there's a number of, let's say, nurses and doctor that could work on the in different places. The economic situation in general, the public expenses and the government deficit that will, I'll say, that is there and will have at some point need to be resolved in the future. When we look at the private action, we could look at, let's say, should I give or not? When will I give it? How much? So maybe I will accelerate or not because I don't have the money right now. What I will give in cash or some assets that is not used, and to whom? Okay, what will be the cause that we'll give to? There's also a link with the value of investment. Okay, so I'll say in some or both personal and the at the organization or at the I'll say foundation level. Okay, they have investment. So obviously, if your portfolio of investment is full of company, I'll say in the pharmaceutical industry, okay, your portfolio is way better than it was. If you are, let's say, in the airplane, your portfolio is 100% airplane and tourist industry, hotels, I'll say that's not that good. Okay, Cirque du Soleil could be a good example of investment which is not that good. So it's also a period where there's a reflection on our own health. In addition, so I'll say that it's like when someone dies in your family, you think of, okay, what is more important than others? So now I'll say that's I'll say an opportunity to reflect on those activities. So I'll say on the organizational level, there's the management of the organization itself, the governance of it, I'll say the technology, the volunteer that need to be there, but I'll say a lot of the volunteers are retired people in some sector. So I'll say when they need to stay at home, okay, they can't go. Search for donors should continue. I'll say the gift strategies that sometimes in fact is better or worse, and the investment strategy that I already mentioned. Okay, government action. So there's challenges in the crisis. They go, I'll say they manage as they go. There's a supporting, a lot of support government measure, a lot of communication, and it's easy to see the communication as, I'll say, as a problem. And obviously, I'll say there's a vision for the short term, but also for, I'll say, the long term. When we look at the, I'll say, the two cases, so I'll say we look, I'll say, and that one is a project, I'll say, which I'll say that part, I'll say, is a project which is funded by PhiLab to look at basically, I'll say, the foundation link with also the Canadian team. So there's, I'll say, the team themselves. There's also foundation attached to just one team, but there's also foundation like MLSC who basically bring together, I'll say, many sports team. So obviously, I'll say with the cancellation or postponing of some activities, I'll say there's a lot of difficulty in reaching out. I'll say when you are counting on, let's say, 50-50 fundraising or event with players, and now you can't do that. Basically, your revenue is going, I'll say, is going down or basically to zero. Okay. When we look at the performing arts, so the arts and entertainment is probably one of the most affected one with tourism. There's important economic impact from the crisis. Usually they will say they will be the first to close, but they will be the last to open up. They got, in fact, a bunch of government aid, but arts is less supported than some other ones for different reasons. So basically there will be slow recovery of those. Okay, there's also some on the recovery. There's also two cross-sectoral recovery roundtables that basically bring together all the different, I'll say, players in the art sectors to basically help in the recovery. Okay, so there's also a bunch of priorities that could be mentioned. And basically, in conclusion, I'll say there's a need to, I'll say, react, keep an open mind, and don't stop and plan again. Okay, there's also resource management. Technology is a big one, but let's say on the fundraising, there's also a bunch of different one as well. Okay, so there's also important consequences both for individuals and the organization. And basically, when we'll go back, in fact, to normal, we'll have to see basically what will happen.
Great, thank you. So we're gonna try and do a quick 10-15 minutes of Q&A if possible. So if you have any questions, please just write them in the chat. I will start with a question from Catherine for Manuel, which is, what has been the biggest challenge in mapping the Northern philanthropic ecosystem in your opinion?
Well, the team and I found that just finding the information is hard. That's why I was hinting out to the idea of having a database where we could have a concentration of reports which foundations have put together on the success of their projects and which one are involved. So it's we can find a few. There's a reason why I was quoting Ryan Gibson, Dr. Gibson, because he's doing work on rural philanthropy, but he's quite, I wouldn't say unique, but there's not a tons of literature that we've been finding. And so we're still at the early phase. We don't have any mapping yet, but the challenge that we're seeing is gathering the data will be quite a huge challenge. And so probably we'll choose very specific communities in the north, and then we'll start from there. But it's too early to say all the challenge to list all of them exhaustively. Yeah, that would be my simple answer.
Great, thank you. A question from Isadora for April. Can you summarize some of the key effects that the pandemic has had over local news organizations? And what are some of the priorities for support for these organizations?
Sure. So, I mean, generally it's been really difficult. So I think I mentioned earlier, I don't know if anybody could hear me, but since we looked at the 1 year between March, when the declaration of the pandemic in March of last year to March of this year, And over that period, 40 media news organizations have closed permanently. And among them, 29 community papers, 5 radio stations, 4 online news sites, and 2 TV stations. And another about another 30 actually have also closed. They were closed temporarily. Some of those have reopened, but we're still waiting to find out about a bunch of the others to see if they'll come back. There were 182 media organizations reported layoffs or job losses, upwards of 3,000. And of those, for sure, we've confirmed that about 1,300 were have been confirmed as permanent. And another thing that's happened as the pandemic has accelerated the shift to digital. So 14 dailies across the country have cut 1 or more of their print editions. So this includes the La Presse group of 6 papers. They basically canceled all of their print editions in Quebec except for Saturdays. These are in addition to La Presse, Le Soleil, Le Droit, and 3 other papers. Yeah, so those are sort of some of the dramatic numbers. On the other hand, as I mentioned, the Narwhal, had a big increase in its memberships. So people paying an average of $13 a month to support the news organization. There has been an increase in subscriptions, and we'll just have to see if that lasts, because typically only about, I think before the pandemic, it was only about 13% of Canadians paid anything at all in terms of support for digital access to news. So that's not a lot, and that's not a lot of money. So in terms of sort of what are we looking at recommending? Well, I mean, a lot of what we're going to recommend, I think we would have recommended even without the pandemic, which is that news organizations we've talked to in the States, a lot of them pointed to, and the literature review also talked about the need for longer term support by foundations for news organizations. So this speaks to that quote I read during the presentation about the need for patience, because it's not going to be turned around in a day. And also it makes it very difficult to plan if you never know, if you aren't on sort of year to year kind of funding, which I think is true for all organizations. We are also going to emphasize the need for diversity to be writ large in terms of the decision making about who gets funded, because we think that obviously the pandemic has exposed such inequities that it's really important that that foundations play a role in pushing diversity within newsrooms and in terms of news coverage. We've also talked about, we're also going to talk, I think, about the need for some sort of a collaborative approach amongst funders, so that everybody's not running off piecemeal in different directions, and that there could be some sort of association or grouping of funders who are interested in supporting journalism. So first of all, everybody doesn't have to invent the wheel in terms of best practices, but also so that there's some sort of agreement in terms of the goals, I think would be helpful. And by the same token, this funding can be used to encourage collaboration at the local news level, which I think is a way forward, because you've got, a news organizations in a smaller community. Maybe there's a radio station with only 1 or 2 bodies left, and a newspaper with just a few bodies left. And maybe there's an online site. So at least on some projects, perhaps there's a potential for them to work together to do something more ambitious in terms of producing journalism in the public interest than any single one of them can do on their own. Okay, I'll stop there. We'll have lots of other recommendations, but that sort of touches on some of them. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think that's great. That's great. I have a quick question for Francois. I assume that there's going to be differences between, big sports organizations like, a professional team versus a community sports organization. Same thing with the arts. So I was wondering if you could maybe speak to any differences between how the pandemic has impacted those organizations at like various levels.
Yeah, I'll say the project will look mostly, I'll say the professional sports and their foundation, But yeah, I'll say obviously there's a lot of impact. I'll say and I'll say if I look at the activities for the you could still see I'll say professional sports. I'll say in on TV sometimes without anyone looking at it. I'll say except on TV. But when you look, for example, on the I'll say the park, the local park, and you look at the kids, I'll say playing soccer or playing, I'll say other sports, I'll say there's differences. There's differences within, I'll say some sports. If I compare, let's say sports in Ontario, in Ottawa, not even in Ontario, I'll say in Ottawa, I'll say in Toronto, and if I compare the one in Gatineau, I'll say even within the same province, and obviously between provinces and region, we have in fact different rules. And what I did is I did something for the I'll say the comedy industry, because I have a series of notes on the comedy industry and the arts. I have a dozen notes to look at, and one of them is the I'll say the government measure, the financial one and the health one. And basically I just mostly look at the Ontario and Quebec rules. And when you look at the list, I'll say you could, I'll say en français, on dirait, on perd notre latin. Okay? I'll say we lose track of basically what it is. And you really need to, so when we look at the different region, when we look at the different sports, there's really a big difference. But I'll say I don't have data for, I'll say what happened in those different ones, but we just think of the Olympics as one, I'll say, which basically I'll say the Olympics postponed. I don't think that happened very often. And will they take place? I'll say this year. I'll say we'll see. I'm still not sure if they will, but yeah, I think they will.
Great. Quick question for Manuel that I was wondering. A lot of your presentation you spent talking about the difficulties with defining the North and Northern communities. I was wondering if you have had sort of similar conversations about the definitions of philanthropy, because I assume that there's like different models of distributing resources for the social good in different types of communities, whether that be through giving circles or indigenous models of philanthropy or that sort of thing. So I was just, I don't know if you have an answer, but I was just curious about how you're approaching the idea of philanthropy as you take on this project.
Do you want to go, Francois?
Yeah,
go ahead.
maybe I could go.
Yeah.
I'll say one example of, let's say, two different ecosystems that we could see is, I'll say usually there will be one, I'll say around, I'll say general philanthropy. I think of United Way, for example, which basically look at different, I'll say, social needs. And you could also see another one where you could look at, let's say, the hospital or the education. So you will have a specific, let's say, foundation for, let's say, the hospital of that area, or let's say the art center of that area. So there's, I'll say that's two examples of something which is even within a community, there's, I'll say, something more around a specific sector, let's say health or education, compared to something which is broader in terms of, I'll say, we cover a bunch of different things. And there's, I'll say, everything in between where you could look at a specific region or, yeah.
Do you have anything you want to add, Manuel, or?
No, I agree with Francois to what was said. We also had some discussion. Too bad Natalia's not there. She wasn't able to stay further. So, but we Giving Circle, we had a bit of a talk around that at one point, I remember. And so I know that there will be different ways that we could look at philanthropy in the North, and that will be in itself something that we'll have to address. Again, it comes back to the challenge of finding the information. I don't think this is going to be very easy for us. And so because we're in COVID time, everything's done virtually. Physically going into these communities will also, we were hoping one point, this could possibly open doors to different models and different network of philanthropists. But again, this pandemic is providing to give us quite a challenge. Thanks for your question.
Great.